My name is Clara Campas, and I'm a partner and co-founder of Asabis Partners. And I have the pleasure to chair this session today with these spectacular partners here. So, let me say just a few words first about Asabis Partners. Asabis is a starting venture capital firm with headquarters in Barcelona. And the founders of this new fund or new venture capital firm is Josep Lluís Sanfeliu and myself. We have the chance to put together a great team with both partners, venture partners, and core team, which we have quite an experience from operations in pharmaceutical biotech companies up to investment in VC firms and international contacts, co-investments with internationals, etc. So the first fund we are just putting together now, it's Sabadell Asabis Health Innovation Investments. Our anchor investor is Banc Sabadell, which we are very proud of that. And the idea is to have a fund with 60 million euros doing what we call investment in health innovation across the board. What does that mean? That means we will be investing in 3 segments mainly, which include early stage biopharma or biotech, medtech, this is medical technologies, and also what we call healthcare or disruptive healthcare innovation, including digital health, other technologies, and health innovation services. The idea is to diversify risk. This is quite common among all the VC, geographically, because we will be investing mainly in Spain, but also we have some room to invest outside, which means mainly Europe, UK, and Israel. And the idea, of course, is to give the maximum return to our future investors in that sense. So having said that, and having presented Asabis Partners, what I will do is just with a couple of slides to start focusing on the debate today by talking about what is early stage investment in biopharma or biotechnology, and which is the risk of things that we are going to face and probably to discuss later on. Let me start with a graph of the European Commission, which shows quite clearly, you might be aware of that already, which is the differences between the US and Europe in terms of the value created due to or coming from basic sciences and life sciences. So basically what we have here is in orange, the US, in purple, what is Europe, and the difference here. Here in the top, it's what are the number of scientific publications in life sciences. And in that sense, Europe is pretty well in comparison to the US. So there are many publications in that sense. If we are moving to that direction, what we have here is the number of impact scientific publications. And here we are also quite well from Europe, that's fine. So we have very good science that publishes a lot and that publishes in impact peer-reviewed journals, having a good impact there. If we are talking about number of researchers, we are quite well also, as well as the number of researchers in comparison to other types of work in that territories. But the drama comes when we start talking about PCT patent applications, and particularly which is the value added in terms of economic value added by this research and R&D, which at the end of the day is public debt, in the gross economics health of that scenario and that territories. And here is where there is a lot of debate saying that there is a need of private capital, private investment to make sure that we can translate all this very good health life sciences research into something that it's business, that it's economic movement, new products to support what the current society needs. But in that sense, there's quite a flight. Let me just show you some data also, quite brand new data in terms of what's happening and which are the trends there. So there is an increasing early stage financing deals, which is very good news. Private capital that goes early and early on, doing scouting and investment in very early stage projects. And which is even more importantly from the VC perspective, is that they are early stage M&As and IPOs, which is always helpful when a VC tries to get into that scenario. So in that sense, and will not go through everything of that, but if you compare the number of Series A investment rounds in 2016, 2017, there was an increase here. The amount of money raised was also increasing. This is a sustained trend. And also importantly, there's a big clue also, the corporate investments, so the corporations that start investment in that early stage areas is also increasing. And that gives a lot of confidence to other investors, particularly in some of these companies. Oncology is still one of the main issues here. Platforms, neurology, orphan, anti-infectives, among others. And here you have, I'm pretty sure that you cannot read that, some of the biggest deals we had from 2012 and 2017. If you take a look to them, they're usually monoproduct companies in disruptive therapies, covering unmet needs, with a kind of pan approach. Instead of we are able to treat all this amount of patients that will have these particular features in that sense. Most of these companies are from the US. There are some from Switzerland, and more and coming from Europe, hopefully now and in the future years. So there is an ongoing trend towards early stage takeover. In early stage, and when we say early stage, we mean preclinical or non-clinical regulatory development or even phase 2 clinical trials. It's important to say that 50% of the big transactions in that sense in the last 2 years have been in this early stage, which means that these are valuable and profitable exits for investors. There's an important need to detect which are the particular areas where we can really invest and have a return on investment which makes sense. And so I'm quite, let's say, optimistic that we can just change the previous graph in the next future and that will make sense from now on. Perfect.
So thank you, Clara. Also thank you for inviting me here for this panel. Interestingly, I think the first time I joined BioSpain must be 8 years ago. I can't remember where it was at that time. I was, I think, one of the few international VCs present at that time. So I'm happy that nowadays about like 30% I heard yesterday is international. So which is, I think, great for Spain, that there's much more interest and activity from international players in the Spanish market. Unfortunately, well, that's not very nice, but I'm here with 4 Spaniards, and I'm the only one from Holland, and that feels sometimes a bit difficult, especially when because I'm a very keen soccer fan, and you know how that always usually goes. Holland always loses. Anyways, I'll go back to a couple of slides on Forbion. So what Forbion is doing and our plans for the next coming years, and I'll also speak a little bit about our plans to invest more in companies to build from scratch versus investments in existing companies, and then companies that already had a syndicate or already previous investments ongoing. So just very quickly, we tend to try to say that we are kind of the leading investors in the European life science. I think for assets under management, we can claim that, and we're going to add a couple of $100 million to that, and it will be announced this week. So our Fund 4 is up and running. It will be over 300 million euros, so quite a substantial fund and much larger than our previous funds. We're based, as I said, in the Netherlands, but speaking about soccer, football, we also have an office in Germany, so that helps now and then to be also world champion, I guess. We have representation in Boston. So Forbion is a spin-out from ABN AMRO Bank. That's already a spin-out, it's from 12 years ago, so that's a while back, and usually do not refer to that anymore. We have done about 60 investments thus far in Europe and US, and we work closely and co-manage the seed fund Biogeneration Ventures. Well, and speaking about impact, and then I would say impact really on the patient, there's at least 9 products on the market that we were involved in with our investments. So by now we have grown substantially. This is the full team of Forbion, and what we added is here a group of people that we work with a lot and has a direct impact on our investment strategy. So it's a combination of advisors, of venture partners, operating partners, and well, this is including all the back office. So this is what you could say the Forbion family. Then a little bit about our investment strategy. So it's a bit a long slide, I realize. So 70% of our investments will be in the EU, 30% in rest of world, and these days that also includes United Kingdom, most likely after Brexit. So we invest in US, in Canada, and of course Switzerland should be here as well as a non-EU company. Most of our investments are in biopharma company, in medicine. We used to invest much more in medical devices, but we have been more successful in the biopharma space. So we decided to increase our biopharma investments, and diagnostics and medtech is more opportunistic now. This one was announced. The final close will be announced later this week, and I probably shouldn't spoil the fun of our investor relations manager. What it does with it over 250 million fund is that we can take bigger stakes in companies, but then stay with the same holding times that we have now. We invest in build and grow companies, as we call them. Always usually preclinical or early clinical best-in-class assets, which is, of course, I think every VC tells you. And then we invest usually to approve in human or even further if so needed. And of course, with a large fund, it's easier to bring assets much further. But if you then jump to this side of the slide, you'll see that Pharma, and I think Clara also mentioned that already, is that the big exits, the big M&As happen much earlier in the development time of the company. So the light and the dark blue is preclinical and phase 1. Commercial is the orange. So there's not much commercial exits you could argue, but this is from the Silicon Valley Bank report. Looks like the same one that Clara referred to. So another important one I think to mention is we look at about 700 deals a year, and we do about 3 to 5 investments per year. So less than 1% of everything we see, we invest in. So it's quite a competitive space still, and especially in Europe. I think in Europe there's still probably a buyer's market, whereas in the US it's more the other way around, where you have a lot of money, especially in the Boston area, a lot of money around. To invest in biotech companies. Okay, so this is my final slide as kind of an intro to the later panel discussion. So, what do I mean with build and grow companies? So, if you look at the build strategy, that's really building from scratch, like something there's nothing now, and we build the company, we invest the company, we provide the seed financing and the follow-on financing, which can be pretty substantial with a large fund, but we can also syndicate it out and work with other investors to get the money around. So the assets will be from our scientific network, and I showed you one of the in one of the earlier slides about like 10, 15 people that are very close to Forbion that provide us with new ideas and new assets. But it can also be pharma spin-outs, right? So if pharma thinks, a good example is Decima Pharma, that developed a CETP inhibitor to lower for hypocholesterolemia. The asset was from Mitsubishi Tanabe from Japan. They shelved it. They didn't want to develop it further. But one of our advisors, John Kastelein, thought it was a great idea to develop it further. So we set up a Decima We brought in management. Actually, I was a CEO for the first year to get it all started. We did a phase 2 study, and then we sold it to Amgen. And actually, after a year, Amgen also decided to shelve it again. But we had a great exit and multiple already, and we need to see what we're going to do with that asset, because it's a shame they shelved it again. So the management will be from the Forbion network, or of course, if there's new people that we can attract, it would all be good. And we just had a chat on that. It's pretty a challenge to find great serial entrepreneurs. So we work with a lot of first-time CEOs, first-time CBOs, first-time whatever manager, and help them to develop their skills and to become also a serial entrepreneur. So we do bigger stakes, but it may, of course, this build strategy may take longer to mature to an exit moment. But that's fine. We are okay with that. So of course we provide our expertise and network, and for us the benefit is that we can set up the company such that it really fits our investment case. So we do not need to. Once a company is established, there's sometimes things that do not really work for Forbion. So in this case, we start from scratch, but really build it how we to our likings, and usually that means to the likings of most European venture capital firms. It's of course labor intensive. As I mentioned, I was a director of Dejima for the first year. And also a couple of my colleagues were involved in setting up the company. But in the end, it all worked out for Dejima and also for some of the other companies that I here include as examples. In our new fund will be about 30, maybe 40% will be build strategy. So if you have new ideas really from scratch, it certainly doesn't mean that we have a too large fund to invest in your idea, and we're certainly interested to discuss setting up a company from pretty much from anew. Now the growth is kind of as you're more used to the syndication, the co-investments, joint efforts with other investors, established management team. And of course, we do our due diligence process and look if we can invest with a current investor group or with new investors. And those opportunities usually come from the 700 plus deals. The best ones usually are from colleague VCs and entrepreneurs we know and advisors we know. And it's still the biggest chunk of the fund, because this is so labor intensive. We do not have the bandwidth to do everything in the build, and also the results from this can be pretty interesting. Some examples: Sanifit, an Ischios company here. We co-invested in a round later than Ischios, or did we join you in the same round? Same round, but you led the round. That is for sure. Praxair is also in a co-investment with Ischios and some others. So it's just for us a healthy mix of build and grow. So that's actually what I just want to say is kind of an intro on our strategy for Fund 4, and I think we'll speak about it later on. Can you put on the...
Thanks very much for the presentations and for the invitation. Good. So, well, they get it on. My name is Daniel Oliver. I'm the founder and CEO of Capital Cell, which is a company that was born to help biotech entrepreneurs at a very, very terrible moment of their lives, which is when they realize that they need 300,000 euro, which is a bit of a killer amount. We have operated out of Barcelona for 3 years, and we have also been operating in the UK for about 9 months. In the meantime, we've helped fund 21 companies. We've completed 25 rounds, so some of them have repeated. We have transactioned roughly 14 million. Out of those, circa 5 million have actually been crowdfunding from private investors. Very, very high percentage of which had never invested in a company before, not just biotech, but any company at all. We founded the company because early stage biotech companies are something we love. I'm a biologist. I really, really ache when I see a good technology go to waste because it lacks the money or the entrepreneurial skill. But what is a biotech startup on day one? It is a risky investment. There seems to be a lot of them. They require incredibly large amounts of money to get to a position where they can make money. They have very, very long exit times. They're usually in the hands of people with poor entrepreneurial skills, or to put it in a better light, with little entrepreneurial experience. And they are very, very difficult to analyze because 90% of what they are is about technicalities. So if you are someone with money and you want to invest it and make money, what do you find yourself? What does the system find itself? What's the difficulty? Well, the first, if you want to sort out a good biotech startup from a bad biotech startup, you need to have highly particular skills. Typically, you need to have high technical skills. You probably don't need to know yourself exactly about the science, but you need to know who to ask, which in itself is difficult. You need to understand the rules of the very, very particular markets that these companies live in. Who buys a diagnostic panel? You can understand who buys sunglasses, but who buys an immunosuppressor? So it requires highly skilled analysts. There's a few of those in this room, but they're not exactly very, very abundant. That typically makes the best possible model for these companies, which works really well, which is the VC, tends to have trouble operating in smaller investments because, as we said, there's a lot of companies who look for little money, and there's a bottleneck at the skilled analysts. Also because if you're going to invest in a digital startup, so a couple of kids with a nice app, and you yourself are a business angel, you have a high likelihood of getting your money back quickly and being able to get in the company and help them. If you approach a biotech startup, it is very unlikely that you have any skills to bring to the company. So basically, business angels who want to have a certain control or understanding over the company they're investing in tend to steer clear of this type of companies. So Capital Cell was born to bring a crowd approach to complement all the other solutions that are in the market to fund early stage biotechs. What we do at Capital Cell is we crowdsource. It means that we have a very, very large network of experts in different fields, and we aggregate their reviews to have eventually the opinion of 8, 10, 20 people who are going to give us a first screening on whether this company is interesting or not. We create a model of shared investment. It means that a company does not receive money from one investor, but from as many as 280. Some of them are people who don't really know what they're doing. They're just putting 100 euros in something that looks like a cure for cancer. And some people have genuinely skills that help them determine whether the investment is valid or not. Whatever you think, I think that 200 people are more difficult to fool than just one H2020 reviewer. So that also kind of distributes the risk and dampens the mistakes. And finally, crowdfunding campaigns. Although when we first set up the company, one of the risks that we perceived is that, people are going to fool investors. Now it's too difficult. A crowdfunding campaign requires sales skills, requires communication skills, and it requires communicating with us for a few months. So it is extremely difficult to pull one of these campaigns if you don't have business skills, which tends to eliminate from the pool of companies that receive money those who do not have relevant entrepreneurial skills. So all in all, the crowd approach allows us to invest in companies without a bottleneck or funnel of highly specialized people, roughly. Happy to discuss a bit more about that. And here's my 5 minutes and 2 seconds.
Hello, good afternoon. For my presentation. Okay, first of all, I want to thank to the organization to be here to present to you the the public lines of financing, and then we are. I'm going to present you the different lines of financing from the public government here in Andalusia. The business lines for business development are depending on Andalusian Agency Development and Innovation idea, which depends, this is a public entity, which depends of the Andalusian Regional Ministry of Employment and Enterprise. And the agency has 3 main lines of activity. Infrastructures, productive spaces and technology, attraction investment in order to attract implementation of companies from out of Andalusia, here in Andalusia. The first one is to manage basically the technological parks we have settled here in Andalusia, and the financing and business development, which has 2 main lines, grants and subsidies and financial instruments. Sorry, because, okay. If we see this layout of the organization, here we have the Agencia IDEA or IDEA agency, which is the head of the organization. They directly manage the grants and subsidies to the projects of investment in assets and R&D projects. From the agency, we have 2 main lines of business for the financial instruments. We have Soprea, which is a subsidiary company from Agencia IDEA, 100% subsidiary from Agencia IDEA. We manage loans and other debt instruments. And on the other hand, we have the venture Invercaria, which has 2 investment vehicles. We have an SICC, and the name in Spanish law, and Innova Venture, which is a management company. It's focused in equity instruments in the public venture capital. We see what's our philosophy of investment. We pretend to cover a market gap. We don't want to compete with private operators. We want to cover an existence of the function of the market, and that's the only reason why the public money could be in that area. We don't want to crowd out private players. We want to get a private leverage, attraction of additional private money to add to our public investment in order to access on a higher level of financing, and revolving effect. We want to use the funds to be repaid by that operations to be used in another or further investment in the future. We don't have the idea of grants or subsidies. We are financial instruments. We are focused in a specific operation. Soprea, I'm going to present here very quickly, is a company, Sociedad Anónima, with 22 employees. From the last quarter of 2009, they manage the public debt funds with about 700 million of debt. They are looking for companies with limited access to banks or investors, and which does not cover the ambitious plan, the ambitious expansion plan, or with companies with a good access to banks or investors to diversify the funding sources. financial instruments, loans, and require a private co-investor between 30 and 50% of the total amount required. Inverseed, which is one of the investment vehicles from IDEA, is a public venture company, owned also by agency IDEA, under CNMV regulation and control, and managed by our company Innova Venture. We are focused in small and medium size, basically in early stage with a high potential growth. We are not a specific focus on biotechnology. Biotechnology is an area where we have interest, but not only in that area. Located in Seville, Malaga, Almería, and Jaén, and our financial instrument are participatory loans, but with a convertible notes, always as an option for us. We have the spirit of equity. We are not loans, or we are not working only with debt instruments. We require a private co-investor covering about 30% of the total round. Maybe some ideas here has been explained before, but I want to remark that the highly specialized in both scientific and market knowledge for the investor in biotech sector. We know or we think the market driver is pharma industry is a very globalized business, very collaborative business models, and the investor and future partners of R&D are usually in areas far from the companies and promoted partners. I want to remark that we are focused only in companies. We are settled here in Andalusia, so we have a limit in our investment target just to the companies which had the headquarters and the residents here in the community. We see the business opportunity in the need of innovative research that we see in Andalusia we have, and services for pharma industry with a cost-effective and flexible. So, due to that strong scientific degree, which has been before they have explained before, about identifying opportunities, evaluation, the IP, evaluation, the capacity of the company, especially in the technical teams, to identify the milestone value, to finance its clinical trials, the design, to assign a company evaluation. For us, it's very difficult to determine the equity value in this early stage, and especially in biotech, to adequately quantify the investment ticket in order to achieve the objectives which have been defined before, and select the financial instrument best suited to the maturity of the process. Maybe later we will comment about that, but this kind of companies usually get debts which has with no incomes. So they are always cash-stressed companies that needs a good or the adequate financial instrument to finance the operation and manage the investment until the next round, which is also a key factor to consider. So, as a public investor in biotech business, we mainly require, one, a high technology profile of the team, and a co-investment with a private professional investor focused in biotech, because we are not a specialist or a specific investor just in biotech, but also in other sectors. So maybe later we can discuss about these ideas. Here you have my mail. If you need anything, I'm at your disposal. You're welcome.
Hola. No funciona. Bueno, iba a utilizar el micrófono de mano, pero creo que no funciona, así que... Bueno, muchas gracias por la invitación. Mi nombre es José González. I'm going to change to English. Apologies. So thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm super glad to share actually this with the rest of this team. So I'm part of IQVIA. For those of you that don't know us, very, very quick introduction, because you might be actually maybe more familiar with these other two names, IMS Health and Quintiles. So So we recently, a year ago more or less, those two companies merged and created what is called now IQVIA. So it's actually a company that is a lot of fun, because in IMS Health, what we used to do is we used to provide services to all those companies when they were commercializing products. In Pharma, and in Quintals, they were providing services to developers of products. So now actually within IQVIA, we can support everyone from the beginning until the end of commercialization. So it's definitely a lot of fun. Within that, I'm actually part of the consulting team, part of a strategic consulting team that works with biotechs and also with investors. And what we generally do is support during the evaluation process and also during the decision process. Where do you want to invest? Do you want this opportunity, this other, and how much is the opportunity, the potential for your opportunity? Okay? So I think that my presentation, what I'm going to try to show you is nowadays, where is the sector going, and also how we need to assess now opportunities from investing perspective, and how did that change over the last 5-10 years. So one thing that some of my colleagues already shared is that right now the environment is changing a lot. So what we see and what we are actually communicating to our clients is that nowadays, first of all, it's more expensive to develop something. So we always had that number in mind, that it used to be around $1 billion to develop one drug, one pharmaceutical, one product. Nowadays, it's almost the double. Also, actually, it's much more difficult to develop, because it's actually, clinical trials are actually more challenging. It's more difficult to find the patients that we're targeting. There are not that many patients that are available, and it's more costly to do it. And also, actually, we have the problems with the prices and also with the budget. The health budget is very limited, so it's not only about that it's more costly to create a new product, but it's also that the commercial value that you will generate in the future is lower. And remember that we're investors, or we have an opportunity that we need an investor. So at the end, we also need to check at the commercial value of the opportunities that we're creating. So this creates actually an environment that it's more challenging than in the past. So in the past, what used to happen is that you used to have maybe a product that was under development, and really, can I have a microphone? No anymore?
Does it work now? Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks. So in the past, what used to happen is that you used to have a product that was in development, and really until the end, or until phase 2, phase 3, you didn't really question yourself how I'm going to create value, how I'm going to commercialize this, et cetera, et cetera. However, right now, as we said, there are not that there are lower number of investors. There are not that many investors. It's more costly. It's more difficult to run clinical trials, et cetera, et cetera. And we need to think on, we want to create something, but at the end, it needs to have value for the market. Because if not, investors are not going to invest on my product. So what we need to do is we need to consider, right at this point, how much value I'm going to create from a commercial perspective, but it's more in this stage. So how do you do that? How do you, when you are in phase 1, you haven't even treated any patient at all, how do you show at the end how much value, how much revenue, how much sales you're going to have? Well, we're in the years of the data. So basically what we use is data to try to assess the commercial value of a product when it's a very early stage. And we are talking today about early stage financing. So early stage financing, basically, if you want to demonstrate value, if you want to decide about investing in a specific opportunity and you have different options, you need to, from the very beginning, try to understand what is the value at the end of the chain, when it's in the market. So we have a lot of data nowadays. Actually, we are a company that provides data, and we have a lot of data around here. But when you're at the phase 1, you can already know what is the probability of success. So what is the probability that your product will get from here to there? It's generally, actually, from the very beginning, it's generally around 1%. So depending on the therapy area, depending on the market you are targeting, depending on many, many things, you can actually define what is the probability of success. So maybe you are trying to think about 2 opportunities in which you want to invest. Maybe each of them has a different technical probability of success. So maybe you want to consider what is the probability of them getting into the market if you want to get that revenue back. Another thing is, which other companies are developing things within that. You can also assess that. You can also assess how many competitors, how many products are in this process. You can also assess how many patients you will be able to target. You can also assess, are there generics in the market? You can assess so many things from the early beginning, looking always at the end. And this is what we actually suggest to our clients, and we work with them, which is trying to run all this assessment very, very at the earliest stage, because you need to make very important decisions here. And in the past, there was more money, there were more people investing, and also there were more opportunities from a technical perspective, from a scientific perspective. Nowadays, the opportunities are more limited, so you need to know where do you want to invest. And for doing that, you need to assess what is the commercial value looking at the end. So that, for me, is the key point of this presentation, and this is what we really defend on. We know that it's very difficult, but what we always try to help our clients with is when you have key decisions, try to do it early in the process, because later on you might have invested already a lot of money. So I'm going to just talk very quickly about two specific tools that we always refer to when thinking about this. One is the target product profile. So target product profile is basically, even if you are at the earliest stage and you are actually not even using your product with the final mode of an action, or even you don't even know where you're going to use it, you need to start thinking how that is going to look like at the end of the process. So many of our clients say that that's not even ethical. I mean, how I'm going to start thinking about a product that doesn't even exist? Well, if you want in the future to decide if you want to proceed with that development, you need to start imagining how your product looks like in the future. And then the second thing is, when you imagine that, and when you decide how that's going to be commercialized, then is when you need to develop your clinical development plan. So the clinical development plan doesn't mean scientific aspects anymore. It's scientific aspects, and it also needs to have all the commercial aspects included to be able to prioritize between different options. So if I have convinced the half of you, actually, that you need to do this earlier stage, for me, that's the key objective that I had for today. As I mentioned, so my name is Jose. I'm part of IQVIA, so thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you very much to the audience particularly, but also to Manuel, Daniel, Marco, and Jose. I think that in summary, we heard about opportunities, investment opportunities, value, return on investment, but also building these projects from the very beginning to create this value, teams, how to manage these early stage opportunities, so many concepts here. So what I would say is let's just check whether there are any starting questions from the audience, and if not, we can start. But I think it would be great if any of you had a question or a topic that you want to discuss. So, perfect. So micro is coming now.
Okay, this is Guillermo Serrano from Checkpoint Partners. No, just a general question, to the panel. You mentioned that VC activity, the activity, M&A activity is now swinging or changing towards the early stage. And if you can break that down by geography, is that happening in Europe or is it happening in the US?
Does anyone want to answer that?
I don't know. I don't have the proper data. I'm sure that there is data about that somewhere, but I feel that that's kind of like a general approach everywhere. So I think that what is happening is a lot of, so nowadays there are more limited opportunities, so that's why we're going kind of like before into the development chain actually to identify those opportunities. And also venture capital, just by definition, they're generally looking at very highly risk opportunities that are not that expensive. But I would say that it's across markets. Also, from my perspective also, when looking at the value of an opportunity in pharma or in generally for biotechs, you don't really split by region because it's very easy to globalize those opportunities. So you will always think about what is the value of this opportunity at the global level and not only into a region, because it's very, they're very scalable opportunities really.
So to be honest, I think that acquirers are particularly global. So if from the acquirer's perspective, it's a global thing. But in my opinion, it really started in the US probably because there was more financing for early stage, also more opportunities in the US growing there. So more global companies acquiring US companies that were at preclinical or phase 1 studies because there were many of them. And now it's starting here because there's more investment also in this seed or Series A, and then it might be growing just for the reports that we have read or taking a look to, but that's just my opinion on it.
And maybe one thing to add is that rounds are also much larger than previously. So it's not only earlier investor, but especially in the US, like 70, 80 million for preclinical stage company is kind of common. Even IPOs, right, of preclinical stage companies is not unusual anymore. And I think also in Europe, it lags a bit behind, but we, at least from Pharma, see it coming. And maybe one point was interesting. So I had a meeting with a CEO of a company just this morning, and so he still was in that concept of I want to finance my next development stage, and it was like IND enabling studies, so GMP manufacturing and some toxicology studies, and he needed 4 million. And I think these days, especially in the US, but also how we look at, of course, with a large fund, we would look, okay, is your IND stage, is that your exit moment, or would you need to treat patients? And is it phase 1, so in healthy volunteers, or would it be even in healthy volunteers, or would it be even in patients? And then, of course, your round is much larger. You raise money not for just 1 year, and you need to go out to investors again, but you raise money for the next 2, 3, maybe even 4 years, and you're pretty much done and concentrate on execution and operations. So we tend to kind of prefer that instead of having your management going out on the street every year again. I'm not sure if anyone else wants to. No.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other question there? Come on, don't be shy.
Question to Daniel. You talked about crowdsourcing in biotech. Can you share some information about best practices? Is this really working in concerning what you said, that these shared decisions are better decisions in this specific knowledge and bring less mistakes?
Well, I don't think that we're doing anything much different from what probably our VC colleagues are doing, which is looking for the talent who can actually help you shed some light on projects, whether it's a technical due diligence, etc., etc. What we are doing is just applying a bit of scalability and technology to it, meaning we use larger crowds, we use less in-depth examined from more people, and essentially that is what crowdsourcing, or a much cooler name, which is human collective intelligence, which I think is awesome, but still the same thing. It's applying the kind of, if I can vulgarize it, the TripAdvisor model to the reviewing of scientific entrepreneurial projects. So as long as you're making sure that you're checking on the adequate skills, so you're asking people who have the relevant skills, as long as you make sure that you're taking into account the opinions of people who know what they're saying and not the opinion of people who don't, as long as you make sure that you're clear of any conflicts of interest, etc., essentially the value of the process is still very high. It is a screening tool, so it's not a due diligence tool. But when you're looking at hundreds of projects, and as my colleague was saying, the problem with early stage is that it's very labor intensive. That screening process, I think, gives us a very accurate way of getting reads of a bulk of projects. So we're getting rid of half the project to 60%. And just that gives us enough to then be able to apply the more labor intensive processes of due diligence to a lot less, a much smaller amount of projects. So that is the use of crowdsourcing, I think, in highly complex investment decisions screening.
Is other questions? Please. here.
Hello, this is Clara Rodriguez from La Biotech. I just wanted to ask, because you've been mentioning differences between investing in the US and Europe, but I'm wondering what are the main differences you see between investing in biotech companies in Spain versus other European countries like the UK, France, Germany, etc.?
So who starts? Yes, yours.
Just from a very recent experience, because we have just moved to the UK and we are talking to extremely early stage companies. I think that one of the main differences that we see is that the cycle of experience and knowledge in Spain is still not complete. If you go to the UK, you will very easily talk to someone who's created 2, 3 more companies. In Spain, it's relatively rare. It's starting to happen, so there's people who have already created, successfully exited, and then gone back to the community to be advisors, mentors, entrepreneurs again, or investors. And that is starting and it's gathering momentum, but it's probably not as developed as in other countries. I think probably we'll be there in 3, 4, 5 years, I guess. A couple more big exits and we'll be there.
I do have, in that sense, I do share that opinion, but I'm very optimistic because if I take a look to entrepreneurial skills or projects that are around in Spain, coming from R&D centers, universities and so on, you see who is presenting that, not only the quality on how the projects are presented or the science beyond that. The science is very good, the business case is better and better every year, but also what really changed in my view is the team beyond that, and the team, not only the core team, but how there is a net of advisors, international advisors most of the time, around that entrepreneur or investigator or tech transfer offices or whatever, that is growing and increasing the quality of how these companies see the future and how they see themselves. So it's an issue of thinking big, which was something that 15 years ago did not happen at all in our sector. At least that's my view in that sense. So if there are more questions, perfect, but if not, I really want to raise one topic. We have 5 minutes, which have to do with the people, with the teams. So most of the time in early stage, what you have is an investigator or a postdoc or whoever that wants to do an MBA or had done an MBA and wants to be an entrepreneur. And sometimes what you need is more experienced people to help them or to be the CEO of that company and so on. So how you, and that's a question for the panel, how do you handle that from the VC perspective or so? How do you, you are waiting for this early stage company to come to you with already a team created, or is a way to cherry pick those projects and put there a kind of a management team that helps doing so? That's also for you.
Well, our experience is have been moderating along the time. In the last investment we have made, we have complement with the private investor, that advisor board, because we don't have the contact to access to that profiles in Europe or similar, or USA also. The last company we had, the chairman lived in Boston, and then the other one lived in Zurich. So that's we leverage with our private investor to get that team.
Well, yeah, I think that's also same here. I mean, it's always finding the right talents, and it's not always the people that kind of were the founders or the people that came up with this great invention or this great thought that can also like run a company, right? So then you always need to find new people. We have a couple of examples, and most. Especially when it's an academic, like a professor with a great idea, they usually are okay being the CSO or an advisor to the company, and then someone else that they trust, obviously, can then run the company. But finding them is is difficult. I think in UK it's easier. In the Netherlands, well, because we are in the Netherlands, we know most people, so I guess it's also easier. But for us to find someone in Spain is certainly more difficult, and that's why if we would invest in Spain, ideally with a Spanish investor, because they have the local network and can help, especially with that. So with the management team, but of course also with a lot of legal things. So.
I think in that respect, probably if you're an entrepreneur from anywhere in the world, you have relevant experience and even maybe a little bit of capital, I would say probably Spain is not a bad place to go right now to start a company. There's a lot of good projects with very good science, with surprisingly good science, that are looking for a good CEO. So I would say probably Barcelona is a bit of a privileged place in that respect, because it is attracting talent from all over the world, and we're starting to see companies with Dutch, British, Canadian CEOs, so people from abroad, even from Spain, in Barcelona. I think it's a very, very good moment to do that. The level of maturity is quite high, and one of the missing pieces tends to be the CEO. So if you're thinking of starting a company, Spain, good valuations of companies, good science, I said plenty of opportunities. If you can put up with the local taxes and regulations, there's a lot to be made, I think.
So that's it. Thank you very much. I think that we are done. We have someone telling that it's time to finish this session. So thank you very much for your patience, for the presentations, for the questions, and for the debate. I'm sure that we would have more than 1 hour. So very welcome if you want to have some chat after that outside. Thank you very much. Thanks.